Wondering, no, it was okay? Oh, good, because I have 59 in my notes. You know what's funny? There's this old pastoral proverb that the third Sunday of the month is when everything goes wrong. That's true. That's true. I'm going to read from Matthew 5. You've just heard this beautiful section of Isaiah. God's children are coming home from exile. Generations and generations from exile. And God not only says, I'm bringing you home, return, he talks about how God will care for them as they return. That there'll be enough food to eat, that there'll be a safe travel. Those are verses to meditate when we think about the refugee crisis today. That God is even thinking about people on the move. And then we move to Matthew. We're going to talk about the law this morning. Sometimes I don't like the law. Sometimes I ask, what is the law for? And when I read a text like this, I get confused. Now, by law, I mean the Hebrew Bible, the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible that give the law of Moses. And thousands of years of legal tradition that accumulated on top of it, all the interpretation. Jesus is teaching, and he's teaching on what the law is for and how we should see the law in terms of Christ. Let's listen to Matthew. Jesus said, "You've heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a man or a woman with lust has already committed adultery in his or her heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out, throw it away. It's better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off, throw it away. It's better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go to hell. It's also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife except on the grounds of unchastity causes her to commit adultery. Whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you've heard it said to those of ancient times, you shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord. But I say to you, don't swear at all, either by heaven, for it's the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is God's footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And don't swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair black or white. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one. Friends, the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. We got to go back in time, way back, to Puritan America. It's actually my favorite time in American history, but that's another sermon. It's a bright morning 300 or 400 years ago. Colonial New England, Boston, to be exact. 1,000 Puritans have gathered on Boston Commons. They're in front of the city jail. Someone is going to get punished, and punished publicly. Did you know that back then execution days were holidays? You were expected to go if there was an execution or a public punishment, and a preacher would preach. I'm glad we don't do that anymore. But election days were holidays. And the preacher had to preach on election day too. I'm glad we don't do that anymore, but I think election days should be holidays so everyone can vote. That was an essential of early American democracy. Everybody votes. It's a holiday, you don't work, you celebrate, and you listen to a 3-hour sermon. It was a great day back then, just great. But who knows who's going to get it today? A lazy servant could be punished. A rebellious child, think of that. Maybe it was a Quaker. They were all leaving for Pennsylvania. Maybe it's a witch. The jail door opens. The town officer appears. He has a sword at his side, and he's holding the staff of his office because he is the living symbol of Puritan law, this staff. His job is to administer the sentence of punishment. He leads his staff in his left hand, and with his right, he coaxes a woman out the door of the jail, out into the bright light. She's carrying a baby, maybe 3 months old. The baby has never seen anything lighter than the twilight of the dungeon and begins to cry because the light is so bright. You know it's Nathaniel Hawthorne, don't you? The author. He writes, on the breast of the woman's gown, in fine red cloth, surrounded with an elaborate embroidery and fantastically flourished with gold thread, appears the letter A. The crowd gives way as she's led up to the scaffold. The crime? Adultery, capital A. The penalty? Death. But the Massachusetts Magistracy, well, they've shown some compassion and restraint. Her sentence been reduced, no death, just shame. She's going to stand publicly on the scaffold for 3 hours in front of this crowd. That's about how long the sermon will last, because the minister preaches the sermon on a punishment day. And the shame will last forever. For the remainder of her natural life, she will wear the letter A, Hawthorne says, like a living sermon against sin. And she would bear that on her chest until it was engraved on her tombstone. Think of that. No release after death. Just shame. Right now, though, she is the body, the embodiment of sin. And during her 3 hours on the scaffold, the preacher rants on sin and all its branches, Hawthorne says, continually referring to the letter A. So forcefully did the preacher dwell on this symbol, Hawthorne says, that for the hour or more during which his speech rolled over the people's heads, that it was assumed new terrors in their imagination and seemed to derive its scarlet hue from the flames of the eternal pit. Witnesses swore later that when the woman was led back into the jail, the scarlet letter threw a lurid gleam along the dark corridor. You know that woman is Hester Prynne, the heroine of Nathaniel Hawthorne's novel, The Scarlet Letter. That's his classic allegory about the social consequence of adultery in a community of very strict law. You know, if you read that book or read the cheat sheet like I did in high school, you learned that she was an outcast. She lived in an abandoned cottage on the edge of town. She has no friends, no companions. She makes needlework for a living, but even those who buy from her do it with quiet malice. She gives her meager profit to the poor, who often insult her in return. Clergy stop in the streets when they see her to exhort her. Children follow her at a distance with taunts. Every gesture, every word, and even the silence of those she comes into contact with implies that she is banished and will never be welcome. And those who gossip, they conjure up this grotesque rumor that the letter was not merely scarlet cloth, but was red hot with eternal fire and could be seen glowing in the night whenever she walked in the dark. But we know, despite that existence, she doesn't flee it. Well, for one reason, there's nowhere to go. But instead, she's transformed. Not away from this terrible life she lived. I don't mean that. I mean that she begins to see that the torture of her daily shame will work out into a purity greater than that which she had lost. But really, if this is the law, do you want it? What would Jesus say about Hester? Are you ready to find out? The scarlet A in Matthew? We're in the middle of his teaching. And if you go back and read the chapter before, he's talking about righteousness. And he's saying, the law says if you follow these rules, you'll be righteous. I tell you, that's not true. And he's been saying, there's a new righteousness for you to attain, to be the light of the world, the salt of the earth. And he gives all these illustrations about righteousness and how it brings us into this new relationship with God and with each other. The chapter before, he talks about how words are never to be used as weapons. And he gives lessons concerning all relationships. This morning, the relationships get very specific and very intimate. Remember now, the context is righteousness. What's righteousness? And so far, if you were a good Jew living in this time, striving to be righteous, you kept the law. A Levite, a Pharisee, a person of wisdom, of character, integrity, you kept the law. The good thing about the law is all relationships can be identified. The problem with the law is it's very black and white. If your hands are clean, then everyone you touched was clean. But if your hands were dirty, everyone you knew was dirty. It was easy. Well, not easy. It was hard to eat the right food, keep the right holidays, worship in the right way. But it was possible. And you could be righteous. And Jesus, a good Jew, agrees. But then he goes further. He says, you might keep the letter outwardly, but inwardly you undermine it. You really don't keep it, and you fall short of the righteousness of God. Jewish interpreters of the time would say, that's too difficult, that's too muddy. We need to make it clear, you're guilty or you're not. Jesus says, no. It's not about whether your hands are clean or dirty. Life is messy. Your hands are messy. Relationships hurt. They will hurt you. You will hurt them. You will fail. Others will fail you. Keeping the law is remarkably unhelpful in times like this. The law is incomplete. It's flawed. What do you do when there is no innocence? No simple matter of right and wrong? Well, in those days, you went to a local rabbi or a teacher or an elder who decided for you, and if you want to read about what a neighbor does with another's bull that got in and ruined his crop, you can go to Leviticus and you can read about it. It's very long. Jesus is saying there's a greater purpose than this. something beyond our feeble attempts at hollow legalism, because hollow legalism is always the easiest way to say, not my fault, I'm suing you. Don't touch that. Jesus says, I haven't come to abolish the law. I've come to fulfill it, to remind you what God's original intent for relationships is, and what it means to live a religious life. You relate to the law only its literal dimension. Oh, I didn't speed today. I'm righteous. Well, I did drive 72 here, and the speeding limit's 65, but I know they won't pull you over if you go 7 over on Highway 50. Whew. I must be righteous. When you do that, we lose the spiritual dimension of the law. And when we lose the spiritual dimension, we twist it to our own devices. So, here's what Jesus said. You have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that every single person that looks at another person lustfully has already committed adultery in your heart. The word look is better translated as leer, L-E-E-R, because Jesus wasn't telling people to quit looking at each other, but to quit using each other. You may not view another human being solely as an object of your own desire or gratification. When you do that, you ignore and demean the holiness of another person's life. Lust in Greek is the same word as the Hebrew word covet. You are not free to covet anyone, use anyone, in thought or in act. People are not things. When he teaches on divorce, it's the same thing. Don't use the law as an excuse for your own unrighteousness, even in marriage. You've heard it said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that you are responsible for making your wife very vulnerable. Very vulnerable means unclean. And when you put unclean on women, they become, in the minds of the law, adulterers. Divorce was a simple thing back then. A husband granted his wife a letter in front of 2 witnesses. I divorce you. Divorce laws, originally intended to give a little bit of protection, they get misused, right? In the legalese of the day, a man could divorce his wife for having burned the dinner, put too much salt in the food, went in public with her head uncovered, if she talked to men in the streets, if she spoke disrespectfully of her husband's parents in his presence, if she was troublesome or quarrelsome. Need I go on? It's an extreme. And in this day, a certain rabbi even allowed a man to divorce his wife if he found a more attractive woman to marry. Once again, in legalese, women are property, and the law was a gimmick to be able to buy and sell at will. You could even enter into a temporary marriage for a single day, and women divorced were considered defiled, discarded, disposable. Don't use the law to defend that practice, Christ says. Sure, it's legal, it's in the books now. Don't even think of it. Women are not property. You can't buy them, sell them, lease them for a day. And here's the truth that got obscured. What God wills in relationships is respect, integrity, freedom. God's freedom, the freedom to choose God's way. That's how God approaches us, right? With respect, integrity, and freedom to give or take the invitation to life and the priority of love. We are to treat each other with the same respect God gives us. Anything less is illegal, unjust. Because from Genesis to Revelation, God values relationships above everything else. And God gives us this gift of relationship to be with each other. It's so profound. You shall not defame, distort, or destroy God's original purpose. At the center of the teaching is Jesus Christ. You have heard it said, but I say to you. Jesus shatters these illusions of that we're good. I only went 7 miles over the limit. That we can't fail. That we can be innocent in outward legalism and guilty in inward motive, and that's still okay. That we murder with our words, or we lust with our eyes, or we covet with our minds. In a sense, he's not really teaching about divorce. Divorce was a fact in the ancient life. Divorce remains a fact all through human history. It's in all the books of the Reformed tradition, what to do for a pastor to be present for those in divorce. I doubt it will ever disappear before the kingdom comes. Christians aren't protected somehow mystically from the problems and the failures of relationships. To me, that's why the gospel is so important, because it's for our failures and our misunderstandings and our brokenness that the gospel exists. It's for the lonely and those who've been used and those who have done the using. Divorce, it's a breakdown in one of the most important relationships in life. And I learned a lot about it when I was in seminary from my professor, Lou Rambo. He used to teach us that under certain circumstances, two people must go the way of divorce, experiencing God's forgiveness, because any other alternative would even be more deserving of blame and a greater distortion of their lives. That's a long sentence. That's from his book. What he's saying is divorce happens, and sometimes honest, ethical, caring couples divorce because it is the best alternative. We used to talk, ministers used to get together and say, everyone I've married, not one's been divorced. Older ministers used to say that. I don't know about I'm the older ones now. And it's really weird because you married people 35, 40 years ago, and the ones you didn't think would make it, and the ones that seem perfect, you find out 40 years later, they got divorced. And I don't know of anyone who can go around saying, everyone I've married, they've never divorced. That's what Jesus says. No, that's wrong. It just means that you don't know the inner hearts and the difficulty of relationships. You just think just because no one's got divorced, there's no problems. Aren't you special? That is a Pharisee. And that's who Jesus, the hypocrisy of the Pharisees, that's what drove him nuts. And I can go through all the scripture times when Jesus sets people free from the tyranny of the law. The woman at the well, you know all the stories. And you know what happened to Hester. At the end of the book, how the scarlet letter, people think of it as Abel, not adultery. It was a symbol of her calling to sympathize, to have compassion. She was looked upon at the end of her life with awe and respect, almost as an angel. Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. I was in Rayleigh's last week, And I was going to pay cash for my groceries. I was only going in for a few things, so I put a $20 bill in my pocket. And then I put my keys in my pocket. And I'm always tapping my pocket to see if I always figure I lost my keys somewhere. I'm always tapping. I'm in the water aisle. And there's a lot of commotion going on in the water aisle, carts banging into each other and kids running around. And I've gotten what I want, and I keep going, and a woman says, "Look, there's a $20 bill on the floor." That's exactly what I brought, $20. And I thought, she saw it first. What if it's not mine? Who gets that $20 bill? Who gets that $1,000 settlement? Who gets that $100,000 payout? Her or me? She saw it first. I'm not sure it's mine, but it sure could be. It fell right where I had been standing, but I'm not standing there anymore. I was going to pick it up and say, "Oh, that's mine." Do you know how that would sound? Oh yeah, that's mine. And then I thought, but I think it's mine. This is a dilemma pastors go through all the time. What do I do? And I looked at her and I said, I will take it up to the front desk and give it back. And she said, okay. And the whole time I thought, the more I walked to the checkout, I thought, that was mine. That was mine. That was mine. $20. That was mine. So I get up there, and it's in the speedy check where you go through yourself. And I buy my stuff. So I guess I had more than $20 on me because I bought the stuff. And I went up to the lady and I said, "This $20 was found in the water aisle, and someone may need it." And she said, "Thank you." And all of a sudden, this woman turns around and says, "That's respect. I respect you for that. Respect." And somebody else on the other side says, yeah, respect. I said, wow. And she said, "No, nobody does that. Nobody does that. That's $20. So as I was going out the door, thinking, oh, still it was mine. No. I saw the woman and I went up to her and I said, I turned it in and people said respect, and I just want you to know you're the one who saw it first. You get respect. And she said, thank you. And I went out the door and I thought, okay, that was $20. But did it serve a greater purpose? I let my yes be yes and my no be no. I was thinking about this text and I thought, it wasn't black and white. It may not have been mine. I am innumerate. I actually lose money all the time. But because we weren't legalistic about it, that's mine. I saw it first. That's mine. I think I dropped it. I really did. I had a $20 bill. I really did. Because we weren't legalistic, something else happened that was better. It was kind of a mini moment of community. No one's ever looked at me and said, respect. I don't know. It was kind of cool. If you want to fulfill the law, Jesus says, exceed the expectations in its spirit, not just the letter. If you want to keep the law, keep the faith, and then the law makes sense. Faith that God heals, God reconciles, God eagerly invites you to live in wholeness beyond the legalism that religion has somehow foisted upon the world and done so much hurt. Not just Christianity, but any legalism of religion. Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, Christian. The legalism of faith. Jesus says there's a better way. And anything less is sin. It's a warning. but it also gives us a great gift of freedom to be who we are and to be in relationship with others. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.